Good morning, or I guess afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this next installment of the Hunt Institute's Post-Secondary Pathways webinar. We're excited to have you with us today, but we will give folks just a few more minutes to log on before we get started. So we'll give folks 2 more minutes to log on, and then we'll get started. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. We'll give folks about 30 more seconds or so to log on before we get going. But we've got a great discussion about supporting Latinx students today, so we look forward to diving into it in just a moment. We'll give folks 30 more seconds or so to log in before we get started. All right, thanks for joining us again today for this installment of the Hunt Institute's Post-Secondary Pathways webinar. Seeing that folks are coming in from all across the country as you join in, continue to drop in the chat where you're from, who you're with, so we can know who's listening in today. You might notice my background's a little different. We moved back into the office at the Hunt Institute in a brand new office space. So thanks for joining us, and we're excited to be back in community together some of the days. I want to remind folks before we really dive into the discussion that we do have closed captioning, so please feel free to use that. We also have a live stream on Facebook, and then this stream will be available on YouTube in the next several days after it's processed. When we finish this webinar, we'll compile a set of key takeaways that we will post on our blog at the Hunt Institute's website, so you'll also be able to find your resources there. As we dive into this discussion today, we're going to be talking about supporting Latinx students on college campuses. And I wanted to frame our discussion before we really dive in with our resource experts. First off, you hear the term Latino, Latinx, Hispanic students will probably all be used somewhat interchangeably today. Generally, Latina, and Latinx tell you about geography, while Hispanic tells you about language. But we do want to acknowledge at the Hunt Institute that Hispanic and Latino word has history and associations that are different from person to person, depending on where they grew up, their culture. And so just want to acknowledge that in this space today before we really dive into this discussion. Latinx learners comprise a growing share of students in college and universities across the U.S. Hispanic Serving Institutions, also known as HSIs, are defined as accredited degree-grading public and private not-for-profit higher ed institutions, with 25% of the total undergraduate population Hispanic full-time enrollment. A federal grant system has been set up to support these institutions in serving of their students since 1995. As of 2021, there were 559 HSIs, which represented 18% of all colleges and universities and enrolled 66% of all Latino undergrad students. Well, these schools are located in 29 different states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. But overall, they serve a growing portion of our college populations today. With that being said, I want to dive into this conversation. We've brought some great folks into the discussion. First, we have Dr. Antonio Flores, who served as the president and CEO of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities for 27 years. Advocacy efforts at HACU have garnered over $5 billion with a B, dollars in federal funding for HSIs. Dr. Flores, we're so glad you can join us today. I wanted to come to you first to set the stage. I mentioned a little bit that Hispanic individuals are now the largest minority population in the United States. Can you tell us more about the work HACU does to improve access to post-secondary opportunities for Hispanic students?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Dr. Decker, and look forward to the conversation with Kara Aranda as well. And HACU was established 36 years ago with a mission of championing Hispanic success in higher education. And then basically, we do that in three different ways. First of all, we have a very strong advocacy strategy that we implement with at the national level and in Washington with Congress and the administration, but also at the state level and key states of the nation, such as California and Texas and others, some of the major states. And that advocacy is focused on two things. One is providing more resources to these HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, more funding so that they can do even a better job in educating the fast-growing Latino college population. And the second thing is, of course, modifying legislation that would better reflect the needs of our community and the Hispanic Serving Institutions that we represent. The second major strand in our strategic plan is really the development and a replication of exemplary programs. And that range of programs goes from articulation efforts between our HSIs and K-12 school districts that have very, very large Latino enrollments, as well as other underserved populations. And that has been very successful. Then it goes from that level all the way to PhD completion and leadership development for administrators that are already deans or VPs to seek the presidential appointments because we don't have enough Latinas or Latinos in those positions. So that between those two, we have all kinds of things that go with scholarships, internships, just a whole host of things. And so that's that second major strand is programs that really work well. And they are intended for our institutions to replicate nationally. And the third major part of our work strategically has to do with developing relationships, partnerships, I should say, with the corporations and federal agencies and other entities so that they can work with us in those first two strands, advocacy and programs. And it works quite well because obviously they partner with us to make sure that they are also having access to the talent pool that HSIs represents for their workforce diversity efforts in the case of corporations and federal agencies. And so that's kind of a win-win right there. And obviously, we also have a growing international presence. In fact, our next international conference is going to be in Salamanca, Spain, in June of next year. And we have not just Spain, but throughout the Americas, membership in Mexico, Central America, some South American countries, and Caribbean nations as well, that we engage primarily to do three things. One is to promote more student mobility between the US and those countries, particularly with emphasis on Hispanic study abroad opportunities. The second thing is to create opportunities for collaboration between our academics and professors and administrators from those institutions. And of course, the third thing is simply to make sure that there is progress in reaching equity for participation in the study abroad. It's kind of embedded in the first two, especially in the first one, because Latinos are not well represented in the group of students. Well, it's more than a group. It's 250,000 or so that annually go out to study abroad from the US, and we only represent about 5% of them. So we need to change all of that. And so we are continually doing research and policy analysis work, research not just in terms of the policy part, but also the programmatic part to ensure that we help our institutions to strengthen their capacity to do an even better job with Latinos in terms of degree attainment. And I just want to add a couple of things very quickly because I know I'm going to have to disconnect sooner than I was hoping to. Is that HSIs have been tremendously successful in doing what they do. And it's something that the nation needs to recognize because obviously they are the backbone of Latino higher education success because they actually are educating about 67% of the 3.8 million Hispanics in college today. And as you may know, the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, has already projected that in the current decade, for example, 2020, 2030, 87% of all the new workers joining the American labor force will be Hispanic. There's more than 3 out of every 4. And of course, we need to educate a lot better this fast-growing labor force so that we can remain competitive as a nation in the global economy. And that requires investments in these institutions. Obviously, they also educate students from other walks of life, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Native Americans, for example, to the extent that we educate at HSIs more than 5 million total students. So that's a big responsibility. But I want to add that there have been a couple of studies done recently, one by, and people might want to Google this because I think it's important that they avail themselves of that information. There is an outfit out of Harvard called Opportunity Insights, and they do socioeconomic, macro level, national level analysis and studies. And they did one on higher education effectiveness to promote socioeconomic mobility for all the institutions in the country. And of course, that included HSIs, and we extracted the HSIs from that study. And basically, the thrust of the study is of the lowest quintile of incoming freshmen into higher education, what are the institutions that are pushing up the largest numbers, the highest proportion of those at that lowest quintile upon graduation to the top quintile in earnings? 9 of the top 10 are HSIs. Okay, that's how impactful they are when it comes to socioeconomic mobility of students. The other study that was done more recently by Georgetown University, Tony Carnavale, did a study on out of the Center for Education and Workforce on return on investment for degree attainment. You know, what is how much does it cost to get you to get a degree, and what did you get it back once you have it? And out of the top 20 institutions, 18 were either HSIs or emerging HSIs. In fact, let's say 13, I got to take that back. It's not 18, it's 13 of them. 8 of them were HSIs and 5 emerging HSIs. So those 2 studies conclusively document the tremendous success of these institutions despite their limited resources. So that's why we insist with Congress that they need to invest more fairly in these institutions so that they can do an even better job for the whole nation, not just for the Latino community. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Dr. Flores. I really appreciate it. Just naming that social mobility scale in those studies, you know, I think it is a lost data point that we sometimes don't really look into, that social mobility. You know, and so I really appreciate how you named it and that those scores are being recognized across the nation. You know, and what you named about further investing in them if they're already doing so much great work with what they have. How can we further invest and ensure the sustainability as they grow? Senator Rucker, thanks for joining us. I'll come to you in just a moment. I appreciate you jumping on. I know y'all are still in session and it's been crazy busy over there, so thanks. But Kiara, I wanted to come to you because Dr. Flores kind of started talking about these partnerships and some of the barriers. Kiara Andrea serves as the Director of Programs at Latinx Ed. Her experience as a daughter of a Mexican immigrant growing up in a low-income rural community in North Carolina has shaped her passion for college access and education. So I appreciate you being here. I want to kind of dive into that. What are some of the barriers that Latinx students face when they're pursuing higher education? And what programs has Latinx Ed used to dismantle these barriers?
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited that so many folks are interested in engaging in this conversation. It's important to start off with just sharing a quick overview of Latinx Ed so that there's an understanding of the work that we do. We were established in 2018, and we work across the state with this vision of building culturally sustaining education systems that meet, recognize, and honor the diverse needs of Latinx immigrant students and their families. With this vision in mind, we were led to host a listening tour across the state of North Carolina that started in September of 2021 and culminated in October of 2022. And through that listening tour, we were able to hear from Latinx immigrant students and their families about both the opportunities and barriers that they were experiencing in navigating this educational journey. And we found that there are 4 key barriers that impact our students' experience through education systems. One is the chronic underinvestment in bicultural and bilingual education workforce that comes up as lack of interpretation and resourcing staff, or interpretation and translation staff. It also comes up as a lack of English language department, either teachers or those being under invested in as well. The other pieces that came up were cultural and social isolation. So that really looking as a lack of representation in curriculum, lack of intentional caregiver engagement with Latinx families specifically. We also saw that there's a severe lack of educator diversity. The educator pool is not representing our students. And that lack of representation impacts a student's journey through this education system. And then lastly, the limited opportunities and advising support that exists for post-secondary education is a huge barrier. And this shows up in structural barriers, for example, that present a challenge, particularly for students who are undocumented or come from mixed status families. So those students who have a parent that is undocumented, those students face even more challenges as they continue to navigate this post-secondary education. All of these findings are really informing the work that we do here at Latinx Ed, and we're looking at this work from both an individual lens and a collective lens. So how can we individually support students and families in navigating this process, and how do we build a collective system that moves the needle for Latinx student success across the board? What we're doing with individually is our program is called College y Consejos, and through College y Consejos, we work individually to provide direct services to students and families that are navigating this journey. We have bilingual coaches and bicultural coaches who have navigated this journey themselves. So for our students, it has been such a wonderful experience to have someone who looks like them, who has navigated the same experience, to essentially walk them through the process. That has been just such a wonderful experience for many of our students who don't have someone like that in their schools or in their community. We also have our Latinx Ed Fellowship that allows us to do both, empower our Latinx education leaders to use their power and voice to amplify the experience of Latinx students and families and to build movements for change. So we do that both individually by cultivating the leadership of these education leaders in North Carolina, and also by building this larger network of education leaders that are interested in moving the needle forward again for our Latinx students. And then lastly, we host a summit each year. We have the summit coming up in September this year, where we convene folks who are interested in amplifying issues impacting the Latinx student population here in North Carolina, and essentially work together to, again, amplify policy changes or have conversations on how we can move forward the needle for our Latinx students and their families here in North Carolina. So it's really important to think about not just how we individually support the students, but also how we're building collective change to move things forward for our Latinx students and their families.
Yeah, that's all great. Y'all are doing so much amazing work, and we're dropping some links in the chat. You know, if you're interested in coming to the summit, all that information is in there as well. I think one of the things that I really picked up on was that the social capital aspect, that building that college going mindset, and having the folks that are there for, you know, questions that we don't even necessarily think about, you know, as simple as like, filling out a FAFSA, that's not simple, so let me not use FAFSA as the example, but, something is simple that we may think, is easy, but can really be a holdup for a student. So I appreciate you naming that. And then the other piece that's been a theme is about this Latino leadership development and more leaders, Latino leaders in positions. And so I think that's something we might have to come back to discuss a little more in the Q&A. But I want to come to Senator Rucker, who's taking some time out of her day in West Virginia. She's originally from Caracas, Venezuela, but moved to the U.S. as a young girl. She lives in that eastern panhandle of West Virginia with her husband and 5 children. Was first elected to the Virginia State Senate to the 16th District in November 16, and is currently on her 3rd year of her 2nd term. Serves as the chair of the Alternate Education Committee and is active working for students in West Virginia. Senator, thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great. So that's going to be perfect. Just would love for you to talk to us a little bit about what West Virginia is doing at the state level to promote access to post-secondary education for Hispanic and Latinx students.
Well, first, let me just thank you for having me on. I really appreciate you guys having this discussion and, of course, being able to be part of it. I apologize for being late, and it's not because my legislative session. I actually had a legislative forum in my district that was supposed to end at 1:30, but obviously did not. So I'm sorry about that. But in terms of West Virginia, I could tell you that we have actually a pretty small Hispanic Latino population, but we do try to make certain that they have access to, as somebody already mentioned, to bilingual services, and that every single higher ed institution has a specific handouts and information that is in 2 languages, just to make certain that the language is not a barrier. In addition to that, I will tell you that it is an intentional thing that we have with our Higher Education Policy Commission to purposely make certain we go into communities where there are more of a diverse background, and make certain that they know of all the different options we have, not just for 4-year, but for 2-year options and vocational options. And I think one of the areas in which we do need to probably expand in the state is just the perception. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is the perception from individuals that might be in our education, all the way from K all the way to higher ed, that there are those in Latinos who are not interested in, post-secondary education, and just getting that, for them to understand that that is a bias that you need to overcome, that is not true, and that just the fact that, we don't have such a high number is an indicator that we need to do a better job, not an indicator that there isn't interest. So I know for myself personally, that is something, as being the first Hispanic elected to the West Virginia Senate, I've been trying to overcome in my role.
That's great. Thank you for that. This college going mindset we've talked a lot about, but the early exposure to the different pathways as well. As Dr. Flores mentioned, the role that Latinx and Hispanic students are going to play in the current and future economy, that having access to those post-secondary credentials and those credit for prior learning, stackable credentials, the ability to upskill and reskill is really going to be critical for that. Dr. Flores, I know you need to hop off soon. We really appreciate you giving us your time today. Wanted to give you an opportunity to just say any lasting thoughts you have, or anything you want to leave with the audience with before you have to sign off.
Thank you, Wyndon. Essentially, what I just shared with the audience a moment ago, in terms of what HACU does and what HSIs represent for the nation, can be better appreciated, I think, by participating in forums that we conduct. Our annual conference is going to be in Chicago, October 28th to the 30th. And it's where our HSIs and HACU showcase all of these successful programs and the efforts that we have underway policy-wise to transform the landscape of K-12 and higher education. Obviously, our focus is on higher education, but we realize that more than half of the battle for success has to be won in K-12. And that's why we push our institutions to collaborate much more closely with K-12. And the other thing that I think is important to remember is that we are, by definition, a transnational community, and that is not going to change anytime soon. So the needs that we're expressing about bilingual professionals in education and in other settings is not going to stop. It's only going to grow. And so we have to find ways of making sure that policymakers and the public at large understand that the language and culture that we bring to the table is really an asset for our society, and it has to be valued as such. And not just in terms of obviously education is key, and we need more bilingual educators, but we also need corporate America and government and all of the key players in our economic life to understand that they need to value that bilinguality in terms of compensation and professional jobs, so that there is that recognition that in fact a person who is providing their professional service, whether it's a doctor or a police officer, a social worker or a teacher, are really doing it in a much more complex and significant way than someone who is not bilingual, bicultural. And therefore, that has to be accounted for in terms of opportunities for advancement professionally and compensation. And we intend to pursue that as an association in the years ahead with respect to our graduates, by having a program that will allow them to demonstrate their level of proficiency in Spanish, as well as, of course, in English, because they are from here, so that when they enter the workforce, they have an endorsement in the degrees indicating what levels of proficiency they bring to the workforce. And then we will pursue the appropriate recognition and compensation for that. I think my time is almost up, but thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to more opportunities like this.
Dr. Flores, we really appreciate you giving us your time, and just thank you again for all the work you do and have done for Hispanic serving institutions and the community at large in the higher education space. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
But as Dr. Flores said, he started talking about the different pieces of capital. I just wanted to name Yoso's cultural wealth model really quickly, and those different forms, the familial capital, the linguistics capital, things that traditionally we haven't counted in our economic model. And I think we've really got to rethink how we utilize some of those assets. So I just wanted to name that. But Kiara, I want to come back to you because we have been talking about the growing Hispanic population, but they're underrepresented in higher ed, and how that connects to the economy. And so just wanted to really think through what Latinx Ed is doing to increase the representation in critical industries, and how higher education fits in that conversation.
I want to amplify what Senator Rucker mentioned earlier about unpacking what lack of representation really means, right? It is not a reflection of Latinx students nor their abilities. And I want to make that very clear, right? How can we then guarantee that students are getting access to these opportunities and resources to then make the decisions that they need for themselves? But again, this lack of representation is not an indication of our students not being able to navigate these fields. For Latinx Ed, what this has meant is really how are we empowering our students to make these decisions for themselves and to navigate these conversations with their families as well. With College y Consejo specifically, we work directly to support the students and their families along this process. So whether that is providing resources or information, even bringing caregivers into these conversations is so critical to ensuring that students feel empowered and their families feel empowered in making these decisions and navigating these conversations on their own. One of the things that I often emphasize when we talk about the Latinx population is that a decision to pursue post-secondary education is not always just a decision of the child alone. It is a collective decision made alongside the family. So it's crucial to bring the family into these conversations to ensure that students feel supported in all ways in navigating this journey. We also have, in addition to College y Consejos, we work with other departments at UNC Chapel Hill with this project called Undocumented Carolina. And Undocumented Carolina allows us to provide training and resources for educators who work with students, specifically those who are impacted by undocumentation. So whether they are undocumented themselves, the students, or whether they are coming from a mixed status family, we provide the educators with the resources that they need to provide accurate information on how they navigate this journey. And that also it's important because a lot of students, if it's not connecting to us, right, or to an organization like Latinx Ed, they are connecting with their educators or the folks that they interact with the most. And it's important for those educators in the schools who are building these relationships with the students to have access to accurate and up-to-date information on how to best support their students through the journey. And then lastly, through our fellowship, one of the pieces, especially this year, we're bringing in youth into the fellowship, which is exciting. We're going to have high school fellows who are going to be a part of this space to really, again, amplify the experiences of all Latinx leaders in education. One of the things that we have just seen that is missing is when are we recognizing, celebrating, and pouring into our youth leadership? And that is so critical and really motivating them and continuing to inspire them throughout this education journey. I appreciated that Dr. Flores too mentioned the importance of a lot of these pieces needing to happen in K-12, right? Because it leads ultimately to this post-secondary space. And that's what we're seeing too, like how can we pour into our high school students so that they feel empowered and ready to navigate these post-secondary education spaces. When we think about how we collectively can ensure that Latinx students are represented in these critical industries, I think there's a couple of pieces that come to mind. One is with institutions of post-secondary education, really thinking about how we're bringing students into our spaces, our institutions. How are we recruiting students? It should be more than hosting bilingual open house or having bilingual resources listed on a website. Are families welcome and included in your programming for Latinx students? Do you engage in community outreach to connect with the local community in spaces where they feel comfortable, right? Are all of the events only happening at your institution, or are you going out to the local community? So really thinking about how we connect with the Latinx community is critical for post-secondary education institutions, because the more that Latinx families and students see that these institutions are interested in their well-being, interested in their child's well-being, for caregivers, that allows families to feel more like this is an opportunity that they can also be a part of, rather than feeling like they're being shunned or they're not a part of this space. And then for policymakers, how are we dismantling structural barriers to post-secondary education? Access to financial aid and or in-state tuition, particularly in North Carolina, where we're coming from, can have a significant impact on post-secondary enrollment, particularly for students, again, who are impacted by undocumentation. So how are we working to dismantle these barriers that exist at a systemic level or a structural level so that students can have access to post-secondary education?
Yeah, I really appreciate all of that. You know, we continue to name this leadership development, and then this idea that I think for so long we've asked our students ready for a college, and it's time to ask our institutions ready for the students. You know, we're not creating spaces that allow students to be successful, and so just really appreciate you naming that. We had a question come in about identities of Latinos and Latinx students, particularly in mainstream media. And it kind of goes with the question that I wanted to bring with you, Senator Rucker. We've talked about it some, but you're the only Latina in the West Virginia State Senate. And so just wanted to talk about your positionality as that and how it informs your work in supporting students across the state.
So it is a unique position to be in. I will tell you, not only am I the only Latina, but I'm also one of only 4 women legislators in the West Virginia Senate. And it's not new. It's not new that I am clearly a minority, right? But one of the things that I appreciate is the fact that my fellow legislators have never put me in a box. They do not see me as just, oh, you represent this one group. They really have given me the opportunity to be able to demonstrate to them my capabilities as a leader, someone who can introduce ideas and thoughts into a whole variety of topics. But I have been especially blessed to was able to serve as chair of education, which is my passion. And obviously in that role, I was able to really be able to educate on all of these subjects and discuss things that it never even occurred to them and has been mentioned, things that never occurred to the average senator, that people don't know how to fill out a FAFSA, or they never had access to these resources, or they're the first ones in their families to ever consider attending post-secondary, and what that means and how that holds them back, and really be able to fulfill a lot of the need to just get them to understand. We really have to provide resources to that. It cannot just be something that you take for granted. And I'm very grateful that I was able to do that, put in those resources, pass legislation, and we don't do specific things just for Latinos. As I told you, in West Virginia, it is a very, very, very small part of our population, but we try to just emphasize more diversity and options and just make certain that we're not just thinking of one set of people, and that we are actually thinking about all of the broad spectrum. I'm very proud of one particular thing we were able to do, which is update a specific scholarship that was for educators, to try to recruit educators to not just stay in West Virginia, work in West Virginia, but have no college debt by doing that. And in that reform of that bill, we emphasized that there would be a greater emphasis put on trying to really find those diverse members of our community to be able to take advantage of that scholarship.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, and naming that each individual's lived reality is different. And so, stereotyping, generalizing what support services are going to be best for a group of students really leaves others out of it. And so understanding that everyone has unique needs and that different intersectionalities of identity and experiences are going to dictate what support services are needed. So I appreciate that. And you also named one of the questions, a reminder, I guess, for the chat, that we have a Q&A function at the bottom. So please go ahead and drop those questions in if folks have any. But one of the things you mentioned, Cinder, was this idea of building the teacher fellowship up some, so to essentially grow your own, to have teachers that stay in West Virginia. Can you just talk to us just quickly about why it's so important to grow your own teachers while having teachers that grew up in community to stay in the classrooms, why that's important for students?
Absolutely. So, as I was mentioned by other panelists, it makes such a difference for a student to see someone that they know, someone that's in their community, someone that they may have, relationship with, and to see someone that's like them be able to succeed and be able to come back and give back. And especially when it comes to education, there are many studies out there, and I'm not going to be able to quote them like the doctor, but that point out to students are much more willing to consider fields when they see someone else they know in those fields. And getting the educators from your own community to be able to get the education and come back and teach in that same community, it is such a huge expansion for those students, and it really helps to grow that base. I know that in West Virginia, that is especially important because we struggle with population, but like almost all other states, educators, to be able to have enough educators. And so we've really put a lot of time and money into having the best grow your own programs that we possibly can. And we have like 4 different ones that we do. It's like all the different ways that you could possibly incentivize our kids to be able to stay in the state and to become educators and teach in our system.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I'm gonna shamelessly plug our 1 million teachers of color work at the Hunt Institute, and really this goal of having 1 million teachers of color in the classroom for some of the benefits that Senator Rucker said, and really growing this out. And a critical part of that is our HSIs, because of the education preparation programs they provide and the students that they educate. And so just appreciate you naming that importance of growing your own teachers and really hoping to keep people in the community. Similar to the question that came in, I want to come to you, Kiara, because one of the things that came up was about uplifting professionals, working with Latinx students and building capacity, community of practice. One of the things we've partnered on, the Hunt Institute, Latinx Ed, and the Belk Center, is Avanza. So I just, not to put you on the spot, but was wondering if you tell us a little bit about the Avanza program and how it's doing some of this capacity building and collaboration.
Yeah, I would love to. Avanza has been such a wonderful experience because it's given us an opportunity to work directly with emergent HSIs in North Carolina and do what you're mentioning when of building this capacity. So Avanza is a collaboration with the Hunt Institute and the Belk Center, and essentially we're working together to partner with 10 community colleges across the state of North Carolina that have this rising Latinx population enrollment, and we're discussing issues of Latinx student post-secondary success. So whether it is through trainings and workshops around how to better support Latinx students, or really cultivating this larger network and community so that folks have this community of practice and can learn from each other. We're really seeing a need to cultivate these spaces where we are uplifting practices that are working to inform and to ensure that our Latinx students are succeeding, and also to talk about the challenges. A lot of times, at least what we have seen is that sometimes institutions are having these challenges, whether it's maintaining the enrollment or recruiting students. And a lot of times they're working on that in silo. What we're hoping to achieve through Avanza is that folks have this community of practice to be more transparent and honest, right, about the challenges that we're collectively experiencing and how we can, again, collectively work together to address those challenges and build a space where our Latinx students are succeeding. So it's been such a wonderful opportunity to work directly more with the practitioners and the community colleges, where we are seeing, at least in North Carolina, many of our students matriculating to. So it's such an important space for North Carolina specifically for our Latinx student success.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And we've loved the partnership and the work, and we're excited. Already starting to talk about cohort 2. Someone mentioned, what's happening outside of North Carolina. These are conversations that we're all continuing to have. But you mentioned emerging Hispanic serving institutions. I just wanted to take a second to, name that for the audience. Hispanic serving institution is 25% more of the population, student population is Hispanic. Emerging is 15% to 24%. And so just a full-time enrolled students. And so just want to make sure that folks understand that emerging space is whereas folks are starting to become those Hispanic serving institutions. Your student population is changing. The support services that you offer may need to shift, develop. And so really trying to have some of those conversations. And then the second piece of that is that there's additional federal funds available when you hit those designations. And so how can colleges leverage those funds to make sure students are supported? And so just lots of great conversations out there around all this. But I just wanted to start to sum up this conversation by asking where we're going. What is our hope for where we're kind of projecting? And so, Senator Rucker, I wanted to come to you first, just kind of forward thinking. What would be your aspirations in terms of growing enrollment and keeping students in state in West Virginia? And where are some policies that you're hoping you might all start to consider or get across the finish line that would support post-secondary students?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Listening to all that they're doing, North Carolina makes me feel like we're way behind. I will say that I really feel like in West Virginia, we just have had so many overwhelming struggles. We've had to overcome this drug addiction, I call it the plague of low expectations that the state has had, and only just now starting to really build back from that. So I would love to see in the future a little bit more emphasis on, I guess you'd say, more one-on-one support and mentorship. I think that is one of the least expensive but best outcome option to really build. So I would love to be able to see what I could do to help make that possible throughout the state, to help all students. But it is especially, I mean, we've seen a difference it could make, especially when it comes to, those populations that are on the sidelines and not getting the attention that they need. I would also love to see us be able to expand those scholarship opportunities that I mentioned and grow your own opportunities, they're all limited, and it's because of budget, right? So as we are, overcoming the, things we struggled with, we are finally in an economic level where we can have a little breathing room. Would love to see us to expand those, because we're so desperately in need. They're such great programs. We've had incredible outcome just from the first few years. I mean, we just need to grow them and not it be a one and done type of thing. So I would say those are probably my first two goals.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think those are great. As we think about financial aid, student loan debt and things like that, and trying to build generational wealth is so critical for the advancement of ourselves and our future generations. And so trying not to straddle students with debt that ultimately hurts them and their communities. And so I appreciate you naming that work. Kiara, I wanted to come to you. Similar question. As you're thinking future, what are some of your goals? What do you see as some places we should aspire towards in our work, particularly supporting Latinx students in higher ed?
Yeah, one of the biggest goals that we have is connected to our Latinx education leaders specifically. What we're seeing is that a lot of the folks who are in education that identify as Latinx are often not feeling supported or feeling like they have a community within the education field. So we're seeing a need to really invest in the leadership of those education leaders and build this community and network to ensure that they are staying in education, that they're continuing to amplify the experiences of students who they work with, and that they're continuing to make some changes within the field of education. So investing in the leadership of our educators is something that we're really working towards. And then the other piece is continuing to amplify the experiences of our Latinx students and immigrant families across the state. That can be done again through the summit, but really in collaboration. And I want to mention one piece here connected to what you mentioned earlier. I talk a lot about North Carolina. Our work is in North Carolina, but that doesn't mean that things that are working in North Carolina have to stay in North Carolina, right? And that is what we hope to achieve in the long term. How can we take what we're learning here in the state and apply it to other states, other areas, other regions where these conversations are also critical and important. So that's definitely what we're seeing ourselves moving towards, and amplifying these best practices across not just North Carolina, but across the South specifically.
Yeah, this is all excellent. I will start to wrap us up. So we'll do one more question for each of you. But Senator, one of the things that we've talked about some, and that has came up, is about the relationship between advocacy organizations, institutions of higher ed. As a policymaker, what advice would you give to these groups as they're trying to work with fellow policymakers, trying to make their points and have these conversations? What advice would you give to those nonprofits, to those advocacy orgs, when they're discussing and connecting with policymakers?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I will tell you, number one is make sure that you start off by explaining how it benefits them, right? How it benefits their particular community, their area, their state. You have to make it a win-win. So whatever it is you're wanting to advocate for, be ready to explain how that particular project, idea, goal that you have is going to help them, their state, their community improve, get better. And I will tell you that most policymakers, I mean, they're there because they want to solve problems. So, don't think that they're against you. It's a question of, there's different ways to approach a problem. You got to sell them on, this is one way that definitely works. So gather your data together. And of course, the Hunt Institute is one of the greatest places to get data. And if folks don't know, definitely use the Hunt Institute, because they can help you with a lot of this type of research. But make sure you have the statistics to really be able to explain to them. They don't have a lot of time. Most state policymakers don't even have full-time staff. So you make it really easy for them and explain to them, this has been done in other places, or this has been done in other communities. This is the results. This is why we need to do it here. Those type of things just make it really easy for them to say, yes, I will take this up and I will support.
Yeah, that's some great advice. I appreciate it. I think we probably said before, you know, we can usually all agree on the problem and what we're trying to solve. It's maybe we don't necessarily agree on the journey to get there. And so it's how do we sit down and have those conversations? So just appreciate that and your willingness to engage in conversations like this today. Kiara, I'll close it out with you. But just as we're wrapping it up, someone asked about wraparound support services. And so just wanted to quickly give you a minute to talk through what are some of those support services that can best support Latinx students, and how can folks on this call, whether they'll be nonprofits, whether they be higher ed institutions, advocacy orgs, how can they help support students as well?
What a great question. Yeah, wraparound support services, some things that come to mind as we think about the success of students. And one of the findings that we came to find as a result of our Somos NC listening tour is that transportation can sometimes be a challenge for students pursuing post-secondary education, particularly, again, students who either have maybe coming from a mixed status family where caregivers don't have a license to be able to transport them, or even if they themselves don't have a license, it could be challenging for them to get to a campus, even if it's close in their community, a community college, for example. So that's one of the things that comes to my mind, like how can we ensure that students are able to get to these institutions of post-secondary education and like literally physically get there, right? That may be some of the things that you explore at your institution. The other pieces that come to mind, and these are really connected to the experience of generally, you know, marginalized communities, particularly those coming from low socioeconomic status, but thinking about the financial barriers that sometimes students face when pursuing a post-secondary education. I think about enrollment fees. I think about the fees, you know, for buying books, materials, things like that. Those are pieces that, while a family may have the means to cover that, may not know that those are things that they need to be thinking about. So ensuring that there is communication about all the other pieces that come with pursuing a post-secondary education is so critical to ensuring that students can continue to navigate these journeys. And then outside of that, the familial support is critical, and I'll continue to emphasize that, but ensuring that you're bringing the family along in these conversations is so important. Having family involved in discussions about a student's post-secondary plans or their college goals can just ensure that those students have the support, not just at the school, if we're talking about K-12, even post-secondary education, but also at their home, right? So ensuring that families are also informed about how they can support is so critical to this process. So definitely want to encourage folks to think about how to build in that caregiver engagement as well.
Such critical components. I really appreciate both of you giving our time, and Dr. Flores his time as well. This has been a great conversation. I've seen some questions about will there be a recording available. This is on our Facebook. You'll also be able to find it on our YouTube. And then we'll have a blog post with key takeaways. So please feel free to go back, take a look at it. Reach out to myself, any of these individuals on the call as well. But I'm happy to also make connections as needed. We just appreciate folks giving their time to this discussion. As we close it out, I want to remind you that we're here monthly next month for post-secondary pathways. We're going to talk about financing higher education through 529 plans. So if you're interested in some of that, we'll be back in July with that. And then in August, we're going to focus in on adult learners with a special series that'll start in August. So thank you all for being here. Kiara, Senator Rucker, thank you for your thoughts and your time. Audience, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next month.